This episode of Gators Breakdown is brought to you by UFM Underwear. Head to ufmunderwear.com and use promo code BREAKDOWN for $5 off your purchase. UFM Underwear, support your manhood.
Gators Breakdown, the Gators fan podcast, because there's never a dull moment in Gator Nation.
The Gators Breakdown podcast is ready to go. Florida, Miami, game preview. Here we go, a full episode of Gators Breakdown. Joining me on this Miami game preview is Andrew Ivins from 24/7 Sports Inside the U to preview the Hurricanes and all the newness that they have coming into Orlando. Also, former Hurricane and father to Marco and Quincy Wilson, Chad Wilson gets in with his unique perspective on the game. And lastly, Bill King, with his wealth of college football knowledge, gives us his take on the rivalry and the state of the Gators heading in to the season opener. Remember, you can find Gators Breakdown on news4jax.com/Gators Breakdown. You'll find all the Gators Breakdown episodes as well as articles from the News4Jax sports team. This Saturday, August 24th, is the Publix Bold City Showcase, whereas Gator fans can watch defensive back commit Travis Johnson as his Bartram Trail Bears take on the Lee Generals at 1 p.m. on WJXT Channel 4 here in Jacksonville, or you can stream the game on news4jax.com if you're not in the Jacksonville area. Also, you can watch your football watching can start early. The same day Florida plays Miami, start it early at 1 p.m. by watching Travis Johnson, Gators defensive back commit. And also, you can catch Georgia quarterback commit Carson Beck and Mandarin take on Atlantic Coast at 4 p.m. And then at 7, the nightcap, while you're watching Florida versus Miami, you can stream Bowles versus University Christian. Catch Gators Breakdown on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, and YouTube as well. When using those services, please share, rate, and review the show. That really helps us out. Share, rate, and review Gators Breakdown. And on social media, follow Gators Breakdown on Twitter and Facebook at Gators Breakdown. Also, a News4Jax exclusive every week. Talking with Troop. Former Gators tight end Ben Troop would join me on news4jax.com to talk Gators like only he can. You know, Ben brings it every time he's on, and it'll be exclusive to news4jax.com. I'll be posting the links out on Twitter, Facebook, wherever you get it at, or wherever you get Gators Breakdown. You know, we'll link it to news4jax.com and Ben Troop and get his thoughts, of course, on the past game and coming up, looking up at the upcoming opponent as well. It'll be every week, exclusive on news4jax.com, talking with Troop. And get your Gators Breakdown gear at squadlocker.com. Head over and click on the top right of the screen, click on Find Your Store, and type in Gators Breakdown. Then all the gear is available right there. Hats, shirts, polos, and more at Squad Locker. Happy to be joined by Andrew Ivins from Inside the U on the 24/7 Sports Network. Andrew, you ready to get the season started just like I am?
I am, man. We're so close. I'm just ready for some real football and not us talking about what's going on behind these close practices.
Absolutely. We only so much we can glean from that, and pretty much only what the coaches want us to see.
Exactly. They try to say it's not a two deep, and then next thing you know, they release the depth chart, and everything you thought was the two deep is actually the two deep. So.
Exciting time for this game. Only game on TV. ESPN picks it up, pushes it up a week, and celebrating 150 years of college football. Opening game in Orlando, home and home announced for 2024, 2025. Florida and Miami in the news a lot with this, leading up to this game. From the Miami side of things, should these two teams play more?
I think so, for sure. I mean, I think this is what both these programs want. I mean, it's almost as if the entire country is watching, and I mean they will be watching this weekend, but it seems like Miami and Florida have been the center of conversation. Now I know they're in week 0 and this is kind of the first game, and it seems like all, I guess, August long or during these camps, Miami's been ahead of everyone else, and Florida has in terms of practice. It's like, oh, everyone else in the country is having their final scrimmage this weekend. It's like Miami already had that, Florida already had that. So I think these teams need to play more often. I think this is what fans want, and just with the era of college football playoff we're in now, where you need these out of conference big time games, it makes just too much sense not to play. That's at least my opinion on it.
Yeah, I definitely think the two teams should play more. From a Florida perspective, it would be kind of tough to have FSU and Miami as both permanents. Would just because of schedule flexibility, Florida playing neutral site in Georgia every year with an SEC schedule, and if you had two permanent, Miami and FSU, I think it limits what Florida can do is say when they go play Texas and in about 10 years or so in Colorado like that. So they definitely should play more. I just not sure if it really should be a permanent series.
Right. Maybe you try to play it, once every 2 or 3 years. And I think if you're Florida, you're kind of hoping that you host, the Miami the year you guys are at Florida State, and then vice versa. Maybe when you host Florida State, then that's when you play at Miami. But I think the neutral site just kind of really works in general, just this thing being in Orlando.
Absolutely. And what about the excitement from the Miami players and staff? What have they, of course, the opening press conferences for the week and for the game are kind of coming out now. Of course, a little bit of trash talk out there, but just in terms of general excitement of the players playing in this game.
I think they're pretty fired up. It's kind of been interesting to see that more of the trash talk has come from the Florida side, which I think is almost expected, and Florida certainly has the grounds to kind of chirp away and take some shots here and there at Miami. And I think the Hurricanes have been way more conservative because they know that they don't. I mean, they're coming off a 7-6 season. They got a first-year head coach, so I think they've been pretty reserved in what they've said, just because they don't want to. I don't know, light a fire under someone. I think both teams are going to come out and play hard regardless. But I just have found it interesting how reserved they've kind of been. It's been more of a respect towards Florida, but that doesn't mean when they start warming up on Saturday, I think 90 minutes before the game, I'd be shocked if there wasn't at least some type of pregame interaction or of some sorts. I mean, I think this is pretty heated, but Miami seems to be excited, but at the same time, they're not ready to declare that they're going to come out here and win.
Of course, the biggest storyline for Miami was the quarterback position and the battle that went on there. It's been some time since Jaron Williams' announcement, to start at quarterback, and to get caught up here. Why was it Williams and that was named the starter and not Perry or Martell? And with him being named the starter, does that mean anything for how the offense will look compared to if the other two were playing?
Well, Manny Diaz and offensive coordinator Dan Enos have made this pretty clear that in the end, Jaron was the one that kind of separated himself from Tate Martell and N'Kosi Perry. I mean, this competition started all the way back in January when Diaz was named the head coach and Martell came in and Perry was on the roster. I mean, this is kind of, there wasn't much separation during spring ball. They kind of set the stage where, hey, we want you guys to separate yourself this summer. I think Jaron really got serious about the position. He lost some body fat. His teammates said that he was throwing more in private workouts with them. And then once fall camp got underway, they reset everyone again, put them on the same starting line, and let them kind of battle it out. And in the end, Jaron Williams was the guy because I think he was the most consistent of the bunch. They feel like he's the one that won't make the most mistakes, if that makes sense. I think Perry obviously has the game experience, having started 6 games last year, led a comeback win over Florida State, had a road victory under his belt at Virginia Tech. But at the end of the day, while there's a bunch of goods with Perry, there's a bunch of bads. I mean, he's very prone to making bad throws and bad decisions, especially when that pocket breaks down. Excuse me. And then with Tate Martell, I mean, bottom of the line, he's just not that accurate of a passer. And I think while he's good with his legs, they're looking for a guy who's going to make the right throws. And I think you asked about the offense being different or catered towards or one way or another. I think with Jaron, we're going to see them try to work that intermediate passing game a lot. I think there's going to be a lot of motion. They're going to utilize those tight ends. And I think they like Jaron because he's a guy who can get those balls and make those 3-5-step drops and put a ball in a spot. And I just don't think they were that confident that Martell or Perry were going to be able to do that. And I think with Manny just being a defensive head coach, you want to go with a reliable guy that you don't think is going to turn the ball over. And they think Jaron Williams is that guy.
And led by Jaron Williams, if this offense is to bounce back from Miami, what part of the offense can you point to as a building point to help the bounce back?
Well, I would say tight ends. They love what they got at tight end, and Will Mallory and Brevin Jordan. I think Michael Irvin, who's the son of wide receiver Michael Irvin, so Michael Irvin Jr. I think at most schools he'd probably be tight end number one, but at Miami they're so deep, he's tight end number three. So I think they're going to utilize those tight ends as much as they can. They're going to try to have them help the offensive tackles. I mean, they're going to start two freshmen at offensive tackles. Zion Nelson, a true freshman, former two-star recruit, Appalachian State commit that they flipped late. He enrolled early, and he's the best of the bunch they got at left tackle. So he's going to get the start at left tackle. Then you got John Campbell, a redshirt freshman, at right tackle. So I think they're going to try to use as many tight ends as they can to kind of help those guys out, and then use them in the passing game. I also think another strength of this offense, while the tackle positions are pretty weak, is the interior of the line. They got some multi-year starters there, and Navon Donaldson and DJ Scaife. I mean, those are both guys that Florida recruited. If you go back to the recruiting process, those are going to be your two starting guards. And then they got Corey Gaynor at center. They seem to think those units are pretty strong. So I'd expect a lot of inside runs, trying to get behind those guys. I mean, they ran the ball behind Navon Donaldson more than anyone else last year. So I think they're going to try to lean on those units. Still a lot of question marks at wide receiver and quarterback. I mean, I know they love Jaron Williams, but at the end of the day, he's only taken 9 snaps in his career, and that was against Savannah State. So a big question mark with him.
And of course, you mentioned the receivers just a little bit, and I think the matchup a lot of people are really looking forward to is whether it be Marco Wilson or C.J. Henderson matched up on the wide receiver core led by Jeff Thomas.
Yeah, Jeff Thomas is lightning in a bottle, man. Miami fans have seen him flash his potential. I think C.J. Henderson said this week that they kind of view him as an NFL guy, and I would agree with that. I mean, he's got the speed. I'm more interested to see what KJ Osborne does. He's a graduate transfer Miami got from Buffalo, a fifth-year guy. And they brought him in because they just felt they were very young in that receivers room, and they didn't have a lot of guys they could kind of count on. So we've seen flashes of him here and there back in the spring, and they kind of are comparing him to like a Braxton Berrios, if Florida fans are familiar with him from a few years ago. I mean, he's not a guy who's going to beat you with your separation, but he's a knack just kind of for getting open. And I think with Jaron Williams making his first start, I think he's going to be a guy they try to target a lot. So I'm interested to see how he does against Florida's secondary, and I'm sure all the attention will be on Jeff Thomas. But I think if Miami's going to win this game, they're going to have to get KJ Osborne going, and they're going to have to get those tight ends going.
As we move to the other side of the ball, Andrew Ivins from the 24/7 Sports Network site, the Miami site, they're inside to you, joining us here on Gators Breakdown. This defense, and it starts with the linebackers and with senior Shaq Quarterman and Zach McLeod on the inside, and Pinckney and maybe even Romeo Finley coming up there a little bit, flying around on the outside. Pair that with the unit with Pat Bethel and Jonathan Garvin up front. How much of it is on those guys to keep this defense as one of the nation's best?
It starts with that unit. I mean, let's go back to last season. Last season, everyone was expecting Miami to have this huge drop off because they lost Kendrick Norton and R.J. McIntosh, and then they had kind of Gerald Willis step up and be the guy on the interior of that defensive line. A lot of people are kind of thinking the same. Miami's defensive line might be a little bit down. It might not be what it's been, but I actually would argue that the defensive line in that front seven is the strength of the team. I love what they got in John Garvin at defensive end. I think Trayvon Hill, the graduate transfer out of Virginia Tech, he's not talked about enough. They also got Scott Patchen, Greg Russo, Jafari Harvey. Those are all top defensive ends. I think Florida's going to probably try to pound the ball in between the tackles, and that's a bit of a weakness for Miami in terms of them just not having as good of guys. But the coaches love John Ford. They think he had a great offseason. And they were saying the same thing about Gerald Willis last year, and we were all kind of wondering if that was right. And then Gerald Willis comes out early in the season and has a monster game against LSU. So if they can get even anywhere close to that production from John Ford, you have to feel pretty good about that line. But yeah, definitely a strength of the team, and it's going to come down to pressuring the quarterback. I mean, I think Miami is going to send a lot of pressure and try to get to Felipe Franks, and that's going to put put the secondary in the spotlight. They're going to be starting two two safeties making their first career starts, and Amari Carter and Gervin Hall in that back end of that defense.
Yeah, and there are some questions in the secondary with safeties of Jaquan Johnson having to move on as well. But junior Trajan Bandy, gets some hype there, and deservedly so. He's back at one of the corner spots and led the team with 3 picks last year. And heck, the safeties position got some help with Bubba Bolden coming in.
They did. I mean, the coaches have been raving about Bubba Bolden. The only issue with him is he's only been on campus, I think, now for about 2.5 weeks. So
Yeah.
he was at USC, and then he left USC, was at a junior college, had to finish up a class. But I don't think he's going to play probably 50, 60 snaps against the Gators. But I think they're going to try to get him on the field because they think he's an elite talent.
Yeah, that is interesting. Is following the storyline with him and how much he'll play. I'm glad you brought that up because I was wondering that myself, and being thrust in kind of late in the process and with an early game, of course, the timeline was shrinking a little bit to get him in. You seem pretty high on this defense, and that was the reliable part of the team last year, given even the struggles of offense. Overall, do you expect this defense to kind of keep up with what we saw from Miami's defense last year?
I think so, man. I just think this scheme and brand of football they play, it just leads to a lot of turnovers. I mean, I think there's probably going to be some growing pains on the back end, like I said, at the safety position. I mean, Miami fans seem to forget for the past 2 years. I mean, you had 2 guys penciled in at safety in Jaquan Johnson and Sheldrick Redvine, and they never gave up a big play on the back end of the defense. So we really don't know what Amari Carter and Gervin Hall are going to look like. I don't think they're going to struggle to get pressure. It's just once that ball's in the air, the secondary's a little green, and they're pretty thin on numbers. It's much like Florida. I mean, they've had some guys enter the transfer portal, so that they're pretty inexperienced there. I like Trajan Bandy a lot, but at the end of the day, he's a nickel corner. He's not a guy who's going to burn you and run with a big wide receiver down the field. So I think I'm not expecting much of a drop off. I mean, I could be completely wrong, but I think the defense will probably play close to the same level they had last year.
And let's before I let you go here, let's take a look at this staff a little bit. Of course, there will be some differences with Mark Richt moving on and Manny Diaz taking over. Of course, the defensive side of the ball is familiar with Manny Diaz. But in broad strokes, what's been the biggest change from going from Richt to what Enos is bringing on offense and Manny Diaz overall?
The biggest thing on offense, from what we've seen in practices and going back to the spring game or spring scrimmages or whatever you want to call them, is there's a lot of motion in this offense. And Miami fans cried for that under Mark Richt. I mean, there was times when Mark Richt, he would just have a quarterback snap the ball, and then you have receivers running 4 deep routes. I mean, there was no real trying to out-scheme someone. And from what we've seen, Enos loves to pre-snap motion. There's a ton of guys that are moving around. He's trying to create mismatches. So I think that's the one thing, if a Florida fan had watched a Miami game last year to what they'll see on Saturday night, that's what's going to be really different there. It's just how much they kind of move guys around. There's a lot more stuff under center, I would say. And I think the biggest thing is, I think Manny's really trying to breed some competition down here in Coral Gables. I don't know how much there really of that was last season. I think at times there were some players on that roster in that locker room that kind of got complacent. And I think by Manny naming Jaron Williams the starting quarterback, it really shows that if you prove yourself on these practice fields, then they're gonna ride with you. I mean, it would have been very easy for Manny to name Tate the guy. That would have been very on brand with the quote unquote the new Miami, but he went with someone who I think a lot of his teammates kind of believe in. So that to me just shows that they've tried to instill this competitive culture. Will it work? I don't know. Last year when Miami played this neutral site game to open the season against LSU, the team came out pretty flat. I'm interested to see if they'll be able to buy into what Manny does, and just to see if that training camp really worked and if they're all ready to go, because there's a lot of green coaches on that coaching staff, especially on the offensive side of the ball.
Awesome. That's a great look at Miami from Andrew Ivins from Inside You on the 24/7 Sports Network. Andrew, thank you so much. And what you guys got coming up in the next couple of days as we lead up to kickoff of this game?
Well, I got a podcast of my own. We've been kind of breaking down the Too Deep, but I do a lot of our recruiting stuff. So I've been working on a visitors list there, just trying to get some confirmed names and, just kind of getting ready for this thing.
Awesome. And before I let you go, you do have the recruiting background. Some of the big battles you see coming up between now and early signing period and signing day for Hurricanes and the Gators.
The biggest one's definitely Isaiah Walker, the top 247 offensive tackle from down here in Miami. I think he's the best offensive lineman I've seen come out of this area, just because he's a true tackle prospect since I've been down here. That's about 4 or 5 years. Was committed to South Carolina, decommitted, visited both Miami and Florida during that contact period last month, along with Florida State. But I think this is shaping up to be a battle between the Hurricanes and Gators. I think he likes Manny Diaz and Miami's offensive line coach a lot, but I think at the same time he's real attracted to what Dan Mullen's got going up there. I asked him if he thinks that whoever wins this game will be the deciding factor. He said no, but I think it's also whoever wins this game might kind of get a leg up on the other school in the recruitment.
Well, but both schools can definitely use him. We know that much.
Yeah, I was looking at the 2 deep for both schools' offensive line. I was like, "Oof." I do not expect great offensive line play on Saturday night.
Yeah, that's it. That is the big question marks and could call for an ugly game. And yeah, Isaiah Walker definitely the big target there for the Hurricanes and the Gators. Andrew, hey, thank you so much, man, for breaking this game down with me.
All right, we'll see you Saturday, man.
Chad Wilson, CEO of Gridiron Studs, joining us here on Gators Breakdown. Chad, how you doing?
Doing good. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, you counting down the days to this game like I am?
I think everybody is, man. Florida, Miami, should happen more often, but we have it this year, and I'm happy.
So you just mentioned it should be played more. Why is that? Should it be played every year? Should it be played on like a rotational basis? Because Florida already plays Florida State every year, so someone might see it a little unfair if they had to play FSU and Miami every year plus the SEC schedule, and maybe not be available to schedule other teams like they are with Colorado and Texas down the road. Is this game that should be played every year or figured out on some kind of rotational basis?
It'd be nice, but I'm in the camp that would say it would probably be unfair for them to play this game every year and an SEC schedule. And people outside of the SEC tend to throw dirt on that. But the truth of the matter is that the SEC is the toughest conference that there is out there. I know some people that from the other conferences don't want to hear that, but that's just because they're from those other conferences. It is a tough schedule. Even a game like Vanderbilt, it's not a perennial winner per se in terms of wins or losses, can be a very, very physical game. Same with someone like a Kentucky who just is coming off of a really good season, but they're not always above 500. But it's a very physical football game, whereas in some of these other conferences that may not be the case. And I'm not going to sit here and go name schools from other conferences being specific, but in some of these other conferences, when you get those games against those teams that are below 500 perennially, it's not that physical of a game. So to go put Miami on the schedule every year, it's a rivalry. So even if one of those teams tend to be down, and if you're looking at it from Florida's standpoint, let's say you're encountering a Miami team that is not going to be thought of highly or not at the top of their game at the time, it's still going to be highly emotional. It's still going to be a physical football game that's going to be played to the max. And that's just another game like that on the schedule, and everyone's pursuing the same thing, which is a national championship. So it just doesn't really work out to have, a Florida and Miami playing every year, and I don't really know how you make that happen. So I think in this situation where we do have it, we really should cherish it. If it happened every other year or once every 4 years, you know what I think? I think it should probably happen the way that it does in the SEC when, East teams will sometimes play West teams and however they go about doing that. So if it happened every 4 years, great. But to say that this should happen every year, no. If all three of these teams, Florida State and Florida and Miami, were all in the same conference, then sure, great. Because everything would be equal, but not Florida in the SEC and the other two are in the ACC, and we're talking about it should happen every year. No, it shouldn't.
All right, and you have a unique look at this rivalry, playing at Miami. Two sons, Quincy and Marco, play at Florida. What is it about these two teams that it doesn't seem like they're ever elite at the same time? You had runs in the early 90s for Miami, and that kind of transition into Florida and Florida State taking over and having their dominant runs in the 90s, and then Miami turns it around again in the early 2000s when Florida and FSU kind of falter down. It's very rare that talking to the big three, all three are good at the same time, but Florida and Miami are as well, since the focus of these two teams, are hardly ever elite, really good at the same time.
I've never really given that thought. I know in my day when I was playing, all three of us were really, really good. And there may be a time when we were all in the top 10 at the same time. And if that wasn't the case, then if one of the teams was outside of the top 10, it was pretty close. So I know during my time playing, all three of us were really, really good. And I know that has become something that's very difficult to do nowadays. The college football landscape has changed. But if I'm going to go on a theory, there isn't, there's only, but I know we've got a ton of talent in the state. But I think there's only so much upper echelon talent to go around. And so, two of the three teams have it, then obviously that third team's not going to have as much. So they, won't have an opportunity to be elite, or, one team is really, really doing well, then you'll find that to keep pace, maybe the other schools are rotating coaches in and out of it. There's a lot of turnover. So I think it's very, very difficult, especially in this day and age and at this time, to have all three teams be, elite. That's become very, very difficult because recruiting's more spread out. You get the talent rated out of this state at a heavier clip. And, with what Alabama and Clemson are doing, becomes difficult now to keep all of those kids in state and feed them to all three. So just stands to reason that if one or two teams out of the big three is doing well, then the other one's just probably going to suffer.
Let's get to the team a little bit. And Marco returning after last year. How hard was it for him to be on the sidelines during a 10-win season, top 10 finish for the Gators, and especially after coming back from 2017 when he's on the field a lot, but the team's not winning a lot, and then he's on the sideline and the team's winning a lot? How hard was it for him to? I'm sure he was happy for the guys, of course he was, but how hard was it to not be involved in that? And how long did it take him to start feeling comfortable after that injury?
Extremely difficult. To answer the first part of your question, to sit by and not be a part of that 10-win season. You started as a freshman, obviously happy about that. But it was amidst a 4-7 season where there was a tremendous amount of disappointment. And, when the season's over, you're certainly looking forward to next year where you can right the wrongs and come back and have a great season and play the kind of football that you expected to play when you came to the University of Florida, and to, have to sit on the sidelines while that is actually happening. Everything that you had dreamt for and hoped for from a team standpoint is actually occurring, and you can't be a part of it. It was very difficult for him. I can think of two games that were especially hard. I know the LSU game, which was a very dramatic win against this tough conference opponent, and happened in dramatic fashion with a pick six. And just to not be out there, he's really in the dumps after the game. Felt really bad that he couldn't be a part of it. And then the whole bowl week thing, not being able to participate in the New Year's Six bowl game against a Michigan team, and go through all the bowl week stuff without being able to play was especially difficult for him. And I think those things fueled him in his preparation and his rehab to get himself back to where he was able to be on the field and help the team. And Marco's really special from a mental standpoint, where he is fearless. And, as a kid, it was something that drove, Carmen and I wild, was that this was very, very fearless. And so it had its drawbacks as a youth, would scare us to death, and he would take a lot of chances. But when it comes to something like this, coming back from a knee injury, it's really to his benefit because he just goes out there and plays and doesn't really give much thought about the knee and that he injured it and that it could be re-injured again. He just goes out there and plays, and I think that's been a tremendous asset to him getting back on the field and getting back up to speed and being in the way he needs to be to help the team.
Well, with his return this year is also the return of Torian Gray there in the defensive backfield and coaching those guys up. You look at it in a different way than most of us do with your background in football and your son now being coached under him. How important is the return of Gray for this Florida secondary?
Extremely important, and I knew one thing was for sure that all three of us agreed on. When they were going through their process, and I was going through it with them, is that they needed to have really good coaching. It was important to have what they grew up with, both through youth football and high school football, extended into college football. So going somewhere and not getting the best in coaching was really going to be a no-go. And I know you don't have control over that, so to speak, because coaches come and go. But going to a program where you knew if a coach left, it would be very important to the school, that staff, the program, that they replace a coach that leaves with someone that can coach the position. And Torian Gray is certainly that, an extreme technician, someone that can provide players with tools when they go out there on the field to make plays. He's about as good as anyone as there is in doing that, and so I'm very pleased that he's there. Marco's certainly very pleased, and Quincy is as well, because he spent time with Torian and told Marco about the things that he would be able to provide for him, and he's certainly done that. So when you have tools and you go out on that field with them, you feel very confident about the job. Let's say you're working construction and you're going out there and you have all the tools you need, you feel confident about being able to complete the task. And it's the same thing when you're going out there as a football player, especially as a defensive back. You want to know that you have the tools to be able to do the job and handle the wide receivers and what is coming at you. And Torian's really good at providing those guys with tools and the knowledge that they need to make the play. So I'm extremely pleased to have him there, and he's been great for Marco and the rest of that secondary.
That's awesome to hear. And of course, in the grand scheme of things, with that defense is Todd Grantham's defense, and he flirted with the NFL before deciding to come back from Florida this year. What is it about Todd Grantham's defense that makes it exciting to play for with these kids? And the pressure he brings from that front seven, and you can only help that Florida secondary and what they can do back there with the pressure that's been put on opposing quarterbacks.
Yeah, well, I think you said it. It's the pressure that he brings, and it's an NFL-style defense. So you're getting that kind of training. You're playing in that kind of system, and you're put in pressure situations like man-to-man coverage. But then it's just the multitude of pressure packages that he brings, the multiple style blitzes. He could bring anyone from anywhere, and that the way that Mississippi State game ended last year is a testament to that. I mean, your safety's coming from down high and hitting the A-gap. I mean, that's very exciting for the players that can play in a system like that. I'm sure Donovan Steiner is very happy to have had his name called in that situation and to come from where he did, come through the A-gap untouched and finish off the quarterback to finish the game. I mean, that's a lot of fun for guys playing in that system. Standing back there and just playing in the post or on the hash all the time is really what you're called to do as a safety. But every now and then to break out of that, monotony and come down and get a blitz like that in a crucial situation is great. And, Coach Grantham is not afraid to bring guys. He'll bring a corner, he'll bring a nickel back, he'll bring a safety. And, it's kind of the way I would coach too when I was coaching. They bring pressure from strange places. It's a lot of fun for the guys and fun for you and fun for the fans watching it. So it's great to have them all in that kind of system. And it's fun for Gator fans to watch that kind of defense being played.
And as far as the Miami game comes along with that, Jaron Williams is named starting quarterback, and his first game is going to be against that Todd Grantham defense.
Yeah, a difficult task for the young man. But from all accounts, what I've heard is he was far and away, if I could say that, the best candidate for that starting job. So if you're Manny Diaz, do you really want to start off the season with a quarterback that hasn't taken very many snaps against a rival and an SEC opponent? No. But Manny's job is to think about the long-term future of that team. And I think if that's what you have in mind, then I think the right choice was made with Jaron Williams. So it's not just this one game for Miami. It's this entire season and an entire program that Manny's trying to build. And so I think he made the right decision there. And they'll just, this is what you get paid for as a coach, a lot of money. You just figure out how you can put the young man in the best situations to be successful in a game like this, and we'll just kind of see how it unfolds.
Besides that matchup there of a first-time quarterback going against Todd Gransom's defense, what other matchup in this Florida-Miami game are you looking forward to seeing?
Obviously, we're going to pay attention to what's happening in the trenches. Both offensive lines are very much maligned. And on paper, the defensive lines for both of these teams would have the edge against the offensive line. So I think the biggest thing is which one of these offensive lines can overcome perhaps some of the criticism, if we could say, or some of the question marks and doubts that they have coming into the season. So whichever one of those offensive lines can gel together and get the job done, I think would probably put their team in position best to get a victory. So that's going to be something I'm really going to be paying attention to. And so that's the biggest thing. Then, obviously the matchups in the secondaries for both teams. Florida's very deep at wide receiver, and they seem to have one of everything that they need. They have a big guy, they have a route runner, they have a speed guy, they have a guy with shakes, they have a guy that can catch balls in traffic. So they seem to have one of everything. And Miami has a good group of receivers as well, a lot of speed, a lot of guys that are shifty. So seeing those matchups, series after series is going to be great as well. And then, I'm anxious to see what Florida's backfield is going to, look like with the return of Malik Davis and Perrine getting more snaps now and more carries than he did last year. He had to share carries with Jordan Scarlett. So what does he look like when he is more of the man? That's going to be interesting for me to see. And I mean, this whole thing, I could probably go through, this is why this game is so great. Because I'm anxious to see everything, and then how do the very experienced linebackers for Miami affect the game? They're definitely going to have a pretty solid impact. And what does their experience bring to the game, and can it make up for any replacements they've had to make in the defensive line? So I'm anxious to see it all, man.
All right, then we mentioned the top 10 finish under Dan Mullen last year, and there's a national narrative out there with all the off-field issues of cultural problems at Florida and all that. Just speak to the culture shift from Jim McElwain. You don't have to necessarily badmouth what happened beforehand, but just a change from Jim McElwain to Dan Mullen, going into his second season now, and just not necessarily the football aspect of it, but behind the scenes aspect of Dan Mullen now being the head coach of Florida.
Speaking on this current staff, I just like the accountability that is being brought to the table. You're accountable for everything. And that takes place, whether that is getting the class. Not to say that they didn't do that with the last staff. They definitely did that. One of the biggest things has been in the weight room. There's no question about that. I'd be, lying to your listeners if I said there hasn't been a big change in that department. And that's been extremely beneficial, and it's one of the more underrated things in a program is the strength and conditioning. So I can't say enough about the job that Coach Savage and the staff has done with these current guys. And if you go out there now and take a look at them, you notice it. It's very noticeable. There's a change in the bodies of these guys, and so in that weight room, which is very crucial to a team's success, there's been a tremendous change, and it's obviously been to the benefit of all these guys in the program, and it sends them out there with a certain amount of confidence. And I'm not afraid to say that it is what it is. But just overall, in general, there's more accountability, I think, that these guys are held to. And for, I'm not in there on a day-to-day basis to really know what the difference is, so to speak, the nuts and bolts of it. I just know this and feel this to be the case. There's a more of an accountability, and you got to have that with young men 18 to 22 years old. You got to make them accountable for their actions. You're no longer under mom and dad's roof. And so it's not falling on mom and dad. It's falling on your 18-year-old shoulders. You're becoming a man. And so you might as well start taking account of your actions and being held accountable, because that's what life is going to do from you from now on. You're out the door. You're a grown man. And so you're going to have to, be held to the fire on the things and the decisions that you make. And so that's something that you want. Football aside, that's what you want your young men learning as they're now getting ready to head out into the world, whether they're going to be NFL football players or they're going to be business managers or engineers or whatever they are. So from that standpoint, I think that's been a great thing for all of these guys for various reasons.
Chad, you can bring a unique perspective to this last topic here. You went through the process. 2 sons go through the process. It's too much made of recruiting and stars matter and recruiting rankings when they come out in February of where teams finish. How does it translate to on-field production and the teams that are winning national championships and the way they recruit? It's too much made of what we see by stars by a player's name.
It's a good question, and it's a difficult question. And I think to touch on just the last part of what you said there, the stars on a player's name, perhaps they're earned. I think the biggest thing is how a player handles being in that position. Some guys handle it well in terms of, okay, that I was a 5-star high school football player. Now I'm in college, and so now I'm going to try to become a 5-star college football player. And some guys want their bed made for them because they were a 5-star high school football player. And I really try to stress to guys when I'm giving advice on recruiting that high school football is not college football. And it's I can't say that enough. I try with all my might to stress it to guys. I stress it to guys who are on the fringe of whether or not they are even able to play college football, and I stress that to guys who are being regarded as 5-star or highly touted players. You're entering into what is going to damn near be a different sport for you. I've seen 190-pound defensive ends get 20 sacks in high school football. That is not going to happen in college football. And so it's a totally different game. The amount of time that's put in is extremely different. It's more difficult. More is going to be demanded of you, and some of these guys don't get that. So maybe you were 6'4" and you were 220 pounds in high school, and you were able to dominate the competition without doing much other than just being 6'4" and 220 and being athletic. And now you go to college and you feel like you're still the man, and you want to put in as little work as you did in high school, you're going to be a bust. And so I think that's the biggest thing, is how each one of these players handle the position that they're in, and kind of go from there. Let's face it, a lot of these guys get these 5-star rankings because of their physical dimensions, because people feel based on, their size and their athletic acumen that they can project into something big time at the next level. But really it just boils down to the mental part of it. And so recruiting and the ratings and the rankings are not going anywhere. It's a great business, and fans seem to suck all that up, and guys are losing college jobs or getting hired because of their ability to recruit. I think, me personally, maybe, a little bit too much is being put on that. And we really should be focused more on how a guy can coach. Can you take an 18-year-old football player and turn him into a 20, 21-year-old football player? I think a little more importance should be put on that, rather than your ability to say the right things in the kitchen, at the kitchen table on a visit and get him to sign with you. But it doesn't seem to be changing anytime soon. Recruiting is kind of running this thing, and so we kind of just all got to live in that world and abide by it. But I'm all about coaching and trying to mold these kids and get them on straight. So I wish a little bit more importance would be put into that in terms of hiring guys or the kind of demands you make on a coach once he's a part of your program.
Yeah, I realize the importance of recruiting, and I probably do stress it sometimes too much. But still, with that said, I am much more behind and much more care about what happens between September and December. And I know a lot what happens in those other months in recruiting, kind of translates into that, But given nobody saw 10 wins in Florida last year, and given how we dogged Jim McElwain's recruiting, we're looking at a lot of that talent translating into a pretty good Florida team this year.
Yeah, so what does that boil down to? It boils down into your ability to coach and get guys to do the job. And we've placed so much importance on recruiting that kids get thrown away really fast in programs. A kid will come into a program and within 2-3 weeks of fall camp, you're saying the kid can't play. He's not going to make it here. 3 weeks in. And it's just easy now to go run back out and start making phone calls to 4- and 5-star recruits to replace a kid that just got to your program. You know what I mean? He probably still has, tape on his helmet with his name on it, and you've already determined that he can't play. He's not going to be this, that. He's 18 years old. Mold the kid, coach him, and bring out the best in that kid. And, I think we just need to slow down and spend a little bit more time on that. Not everyone is ready to go right away, and sometimes the greatness in a kid takes 2 or 3 years to come out. And let's not be so fast to throw them away and go find another 5-star kid at the local high school. I just don't like that we do that.
Well said. Chad, before we let you go, let all of our Gators Breakdown listeners know where to find you and what they're getting with Gridiron Studs.
Oh, well, first of all, I'll talk about Gridiron Studs. I'm very happy right now we're in the process of redoing the website, which is not something I had a tremendous amount of focus on. It was really more on the app. And so I'm happy about the website, and it should be totally redone here in the next 30 days. So to have an awesome website going with what's an already awesome app, I'm just happy about the developments with that. But for people who don't know, the Gridiron Studs app allows high school football players to get on and create a profile and detailing all of their athletic and academic accomplishments, and they can list their offers and pictures and highlight videos, everything that they need to, have a coach, a college football coach recruit them. But on top of that, they keep fans updated with what's going on, with the latest going on in their recruiting. So they keep a recruiting status update on there. So they'll talk about their visits and offers that they've received, and all the latest things that are going on with their college football recruiting. And so it's a great thing for fans who want all the latest information on their favorite recruits, and it's great about that. So if you want to follow me on social media, I'm here saying something crazy every now and then on Twitter at Gridiron Studs, and then on Instagram, where I have a pretty large following and do a lot of great stuff on there and provide a lot of great content. It's the same, at Gridiron Studs on Instagram. Those are the two best ways to find, follow me, and keep up to date on Gridiron Studs and the Gridiron Studs app.
Awesome. Chad, man, I can't thank you so much for previewing Florida, Miami, and the knowings of the program like you have. Thanks once again for joining us here on Gators Breakdown.
Yeah, David, I love what you're doing, man, and I love the way you get in there, get in depth, and break it down. And I hope the fans and people listening out there love it too. So I appreciate you having me on.
Absolutely. We'll do it again. Thanks, man. Before we move on, guys, you have got to try UFM underwear. It is hot out there, and whether you're out there tailgating or working, you need a pair of UFM underwear. Underwear for Men is the only brand of men's underwear that offers both isolation and support, all while keeping you cool. Unlike other pouch underwear brands that have thin mesh panels or pre-sized pouches, Underwear for Men's patented pending design prevents skin-on-skin contact and eliminates chafing. Underwear for Men is a state of Florida company and has you covered no matter the activity. Everyday underwear, athletic underwear, work underwear, medical underwear, Underwear for Men is made for it all. Try your pair now. Head over to ufmunderwear.com and use promo code BREAKDOWN to get $5 off your purchase. UFM Underwear. Support your manhood. And we're inching closer to Florida and Miami, and joining me here on Gators Breakdown is Bill King from The Bill King Show on WNSR up in Nashville. Bill, Florida, Miami, some old-time rivals, probably don't play as much as they should. Is this a game you'd like to see play more?
Oh, I think so. It's interesting. Miami needs to bring it up some. We'll see if they're worthy. But I'd really like to see it back in the day, in the 90s, when Miami's program was all-time peaking those years all the way up until '01 versus Spurrier. Those would have been some fun games. That game isn't today where it would have been then. But if both of those teams are right, it would be one of the fantastic games in college football.
Absolutely, and we'll probably, we'll get an announcement. Florida Miami will be probably doing a home and home too, coming up in the near future. But for now, game in Orlando this coming weekend, Florida Miami. Bill, what do you want to see from both teams? Florida's coming into this game top 10, off of a top 10 finish last year. Dan Mullen, really good first year going against Manny Diaz at Miami, and coming in with a new head coach there. His first game with a first time starting quarterback.
To me, this game's more about Miami, and I'll explain what I mean there. I think I know Florida. Florida's a really good, solid team. They're not great, but they're good. And we know the personnel that Florida has. They can be physical. They can run the ball. They've got a very good receiving core. They've got a quarterback who found himself a year ago. Defense is going to be salty as usual. Miami, I've got questions about. Quarterback job has been announced. They're going with Jaron Williams. He was a 4-star recruit, we all recall. Pretty good player, but we haven't seen him play college ball, really. And I don't know what they can get done offensively in this game. This is where my questions are. So I go into the game thinking I know Florida and wondering about Miami.
Do you like that this game is that week 0 game and it's the only game on in that time slot? Of course, there's another game later that night, Arizona State, Hawaii there. But, this game's been pushed up. It's in the spotlight on ESPN. They're kind of surrounding the 150 years of college football around this game. Do you wish there were some other games going on that day, or are you good with this being the prime matchup?
I kind of like it standing alone, as you just mentioned. I like that. And then that gets us all hungry for the first really big weekend, the next weekend of football, where everybody basically plays. I'm good with it. I kind of like that standalone thing. If I'm a Gator, I like that too. If I'm a Miami Hurricane, because there's really nothing else. If you're a college football fan, your eyeballs have to be there. I like that.
And Bill, I bring up this point, and let me know if you agree or not. You'd go back to the way Florida ended last year. And look, we know FSU's not the same FSU, but it was good for Florida to get that monkey off their back. And then you go to the Peach Bowl in Michigan, and a team you've struggled with recently as much as you've played them. And, you go and put up 40 points against them. And now you're going against Miami. And much like FSU, it's not the same team as, they can be and what they can live up to be. But I still say, no matter the reason why you beat these teams or maybe even beat them in talking about Miami, it still says a lot for you to say you beat FSU, you beat Michigan, you beat Miami. I know different years, but 3 games in a row, no matter what those programs look like at the moment.
Well, if you're Florida, it's not your problem where Florida State is as far as how good the team may or may not be. The same with Michigan. Michigan had a pretty good season until the Ohio State game. And playing Miami, it's not your problem. You can't determine what level they're going to play on. Beating them looks good on the resume, regardless of that. I agree with that. And frankly, if you're Florida, heck, you don't want Florida State to be good. You don't need them to be good. Florida doesn't need Florida State, I should say, to be good, to get into some sort of championship at all.
Yeah, and that brings up another point there, Bill. It seems weird that the big 3 aren't good at the same time. You had what Miami did in the 80s and FSU kind of toward the late 80s and all of 90s. Miami kind of fell off when Florida came about with Spurrier, so you have Florida State. But it's rare for all 3 teams to be what you would call great or elite at the same time.
It is kind of interesting. That typically is a function of the head coach. If you're hiring a succession of wrong fits, which basically Miami has done every time since Butch Davis, Larry Coker won the first national championship got beat by the Buckeyes the next year, and then the whole thing eroded, and he got fired. Every hire since then has been the wrong hire, in essence, to get Miami back at least. And they've done this year after year after year after year. Now, I'm not judging Manny Diaz yet. He hadn't coached a game for him as the head coach. But, yeah, it's a function of bad hires. If you want to boil it down to the common denominator, it's who'd you bring in? Who's your guy? Florida State brought in Jimbo Fisher, yielded a national championship. That was a good hire. Even though it ended in a sour way, that was a good hire. The Gators, since Spurrier, have made a couple of bad hires, as we know. And what was the outcome there? Program went down. It's pretty easy.
Bill, Bill King from the Bill King Show on WNSR joining us here on Gators Breakdown. A few more thoughts from him before we let him go. Bill, how much does Felipe Franks need to improve, or what does he need to prove as Florida goes into the season top 10?
Well, this is his first year where we begin the season and there's success on his back. They found the magic formula. Now, look, he wasn't great. He was good. And good was a big improvement over where he had been, which was consistently inconsistent. Didn't even look like a starting quarterback at times prior to last year. They found his stride. You always get better. And there's things you can add to the offense. This is a 6'6", 240-pound big quarterback who can make plays in the passing game. You can run it. You can make him an offensive weapon individually, not throwing the football, along with those running backs. I think it just gets better there with consistency. And he's got that year. He's got to have confidence, too, which is a big thing.
Yeah, with what Florida has at running back and receiver and around him, offensive line's a question, but skill player talent, I think has to boost that confidence a little bit.
I think so. And I know that prior to last year, the offensive line had been a problem, and it had been seemingly a year-to-year problem for a while. Last year, they played pretty solid up there, I thought. I'm not real worried about that group. I know there's some question marks, but I think Dan Mullen typically gets those things fixed.
Bill, recruiting as a big topic for all the big elite programs out there. There's a split among the Florida fan base at how much it matters, and especially with Dan Mullen leading the charge and his reputation for developing players. Does he have to recruit top 5 like Alabama and Georgia to overcome those two teams?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, you got to – that's the one area Dan Mullen has got to do better. And that's not to suggest he's not getting the players. That's not my point. But you got to get elite, and you've got to stock a roster like that. Not every player has to be Johnny Five-Star, but if you're going to go beat Alabama and you're going to beat Georgia or Clemson, you got to recruit like they are. Florida's not recruiting like they are right now. There's a difference. There's a clear separation. That roster does not look like their rosters. And if Mullen is going to make Florida look like Spurrier peak, and not all Spurrier's classes were top ranked, but tons of talent. Urban Meyer peak, 06, 08, 09. You got to get players that are like that. And right now, that is not happening, not top to bottom.
Yeah, but I liken it to, it doesn't mean you won't beat those teams a year or a game, but to consistently compete up there and be in that conversation right. Year in and year out, that's where you've got to match them there. And I kind of, the reason we should want that is because we do know how Dan Mullen develops players. So it should be, I hate saying there's shoe-ins or for sure things, but I think if you give Dan Mullen that talent, then that's about as close to as for sure thing as making Florida a perennial contender, is having that type of talent with his reputation.
Well, I agree. I think he's a coach that would belong in that ballgame with that kind of talent. Here's the thing now. Think about the environment we're in right now. If you're going to get ultimately to a title, let's say SEC and or national, you got to go through the best coach that's ever done it, ever, in Nick Saban. He'll go down as the best ever. Better than Bear Bryant, who was formerly the best ever on the same campus. You got to go through him maybe a couple times. it depends on where you are in history too. When Urban Meyer got the Florida job, I thought it was a slam dunk he was going to win big. I didn't doubt that. But Nick Saban wasn't there. He had left LSU. He was flirting in the NFL. And then, of course, he showed back up in 07. So there was an overlap. And then it took him a year to clean up Mike Shula's mess. So 07 was basically a wash. 08, he had him back right. 09, they went a natty. Now you've got Nick Saban, that Dan Mullen's got to deal with, at Florida. Better place to be than Mississippi State, as we know. And if you get through them, you might hit Clemson, which is going to have an elite roster. Clemson right now feels like they're having a generational recruiting class. And this is a team that's won 2 of the last 3 natties. There's a lot of places where you've got to break through that wall now that maybe in some other eras you didn't have to. It is more hard right now if you're not Alabama or Clemson to win a national championship than maybe ever, because you have to deal with them.
Bill, there's a big question going around the Florida fan base right now, and you can speak to this probably better than anybody can from the other side of it, and that is Florida and Tennessee still a rivalry game? And we know Florida's recent dominance in the series, even dating back to the 90s, and Peyton Manning never beaten Florida. You know, if you look at kind of the order of Florida's rivals, you have Georgia and FSU in either order up top. Then you probably may slot LSU there in that third spot, or Tennessee in that third spot. There's a lot of Gator fans even questioning if Tennessee's a rivalry game anymore. I think on the Tennessee side of things, it still is, but from a Florida side of things, you can't blame the fan base for the recency bias and LSU kind of jumping in that third peg.
Well, they still play, but I don't look at it like that. When Florida and Tennessee are about to play a random game any year, I don't get the adrenaline rush of the Spurrier years. Nothing. I don't think it'll ever look like that again, where both teams were playing for a division, a league, and maybe a natty. That's how good they work together. And I'm talking about these teams combined. Obviously, Tennessee has not been there. And Florida has spent a whole lot of years since Urban Meyer not being good enough, too. But it's been more Tennessee as the inadequate of the pairing than Florida. And Florida has owned that series from Steve Spurrier until now. I don't think it's certainly not I'm not looking at that game on the calendar right now saying I can't wait to get to it, because it hasn't been very interesting. And let's face it, the game hadn't really meant anything. Bigger picture, now it means something to the locker room, and for the fan bases it matters that day, but big picture it means nothing. That needs to change. And again, it's more Tennessee needing to rise up and get better. Florida needs to some too, but Tennessee's got further to go.
Bill, last thought here. I've been on your show plenty of times, and we've discussed the talent we think Florida has on this year's team. Would it surprise you if Florida was representing the SEC East in Atlanta instead of Georgia? Or how much would it surprise you?
Yeah, it'd be a big shock to me. I think the roster difference is pretty significant right now, and it's depth. It might not be that Florida's first 11, first 22 are that less, let's say, talented than Georgia, but it's the years and it's the depth in recruiting, and that matters. That matters, as we know. On a physical football field, all those things multiply. The only way that happens is somebody is going to have to upset Georgia. And I'm not even talking about the Florida-Georgia game. I'm talking Florida's going to need some other people to do work for them. And I don't know who in the East. Tennessee's not ready to beat Georgia. None of the other teams in the East are ready to beat Georgia. Georgia doesn't have to play Alabama. Georgia does play A&M. A&M is the best team in America that has yet to ever do it historically, unless you count the 1930s or something. But I'm talking about modern. That's got unlimited resources, and they're having phenomenal recruiting success. I don't think this is the year, because A&M has to play Clemson on the road, Georgia, Alabama plus the SEC West. I think that just beats you up. You can have one of your best teams ever and go, 8-4 there, just due to circumstances. But that's one maybe, if you could get an upset somewhere in there and Georgia loses a couple games, the only way Florida represents the East, Dave, is if Georgia comes back to the pack. That's the only way this happens.
And that is the great college football mind of Bill King there. Bill, let our Gators Breakdown listeners know where they can find your show time-wise. I know a little difference with Eastern and Central time since you're located there in Tennessee, but let our Gators Breakdown listeners know, how they can get your show.
Go to @BillisKing on Twitter. All the information is there. We've got an app where people all over the place listen to the show, all over the planet. And it's free. Just click on that app. But it's all promoted on Twitter, @BillisKing on Twitter. The show is every morning, Monday through Friday, your time, Eastern, 7 until 10.
The best college football talk there. I'm on Bill King's show every Tuesday morning. You can catch me there. Bill, I enjoy it every week. I have for years. Listen to you even before that. So, I find it an honor to be on your show every week.
Dave, I appreciate you, buddy.
All right, talking season almost finished, guys. Florida and Miami is almost here, and I'm looking, for what I'm looking for in this game, and for the Gators is getting off to a faster start, a faster start on offense and defense too. Y'all know my stat on this. Florida hasn't scored an offensive touchdown versus an FBS opponent since last season's Tennessee game. And the reason I say a fast start on defense is games where Florida struggled last season, the defense gave up points early on, especially that midseason stretch of Vanderbilt, Georgia, Missouri, South Carolina. Miami's bringing in an offense that is very inexperienced at quarterback, at the tackle spots on the offensive line, and in the secondary. So, also inexperienced in the head coaching department with Manny Diaz. I'm not sure, I expect it in game one, but if Florida gets off to a fast start and builds an early lead and forces Miami to where they can't protect Williams with the running game, if Florida gets up early, this game is over. And in order to do that, Florida may have to open up this game more aggressive than we think. And I'm telling you, if Florida gets up a couple scores early in this game, Florida's chances are, it'd be hard to lose this game. Todd Grantham's defense with a lead, knowing what's coming, spells disaster for a young quarterback like Williams. This would also let Florida's run game, salt the game away with a stable of backs led by Michael Pirine. And the thing is, if this is going to happen, it means Florida's offensive line must hold up early on. If the aggression is there in play calling, that could also lead to some turnovers. And Franks does struggle under pressure there. That stat's been going around this week. If you pressure him, of course, not all quarterbacks are the same quarterback when they get pressured. But Franks, he got a clean pocket a good time last year, a bit of the time last year, and one reason for the jump in his production. So, the Florida offensive line, it is going to be on them. If Florida decides to get aggressive toward the beginning of the game, they got to give Frank some time. So, that leads to something to watch for, in my opinion, is how aggressive Mullen gets early on, to try and put some points on the board and put pressure on Miami. And I'm in the belief that early in the season that the offense won't be too aggressive. But in this game in particular, in the situation at quarterback for Miami and the youth on the offensive line, I can see that being a part in a big win, is trying to get up to a lead and make Miami fight from behind. So a couple matchups I'm looking forward to watching is, of course, this Florida offensive line versus the Miami defensive front. This defensive front is good, but can be had for some rushing yards. North Carolina ran for 215 yards on Miami last year. Boston College, 223 yards. Georgia Tech, 230 yards. Wisconsin, 333. It may take some carries to get there, but yards can be had. So, I think if Florida rushes anywhere near 200 yards, and I feel pretty good about a win here for the Gators. And it's as far as the Florida defense, I want to see how Amari Burney reacts to what I think will be a Miami team that tries to run the ball and throw to the tight ends in a conservative approach by them. That means Burney's going to be involved, and involved a lot, in my opinion. How does he react to the increased workload, especially when playing closer to the line of scrimmage and getting down and dirty with offensive linemen in the run game, and then having to keep up with Miami's tight ends? be a good first test for Bernie, but also Ventrell Miller and James Houston. We know what we're getting in David Reese, and we love what we've heard so far on Bernie, Miller, and Houston at this other linebacker position. But for as conservative as I think Miami gets in their play calling, those three players will play. We'll see plenty of action coming their way in this game. So with all the previewing, all the discussion that we've had for months, I really like where Florida is compared to what Miami has coming into this game. Mullen's experience is, his experience versus Diaz's experience isn't even close. And just because of that factor alone, this is a must-win for Florida. There's no excuse for Mullen to go lose this game to Miami and Diaz. There are factors I look at when first analyzing this game, and and this goes for any game. When I'm looking at any game, first thing I look at is who I think has the better coach and who I think has the better quarterback. And to me, neither one of those are even close to me coming into this game. Florida's got the advantage of both. Both offensive lines are question marks, but Florida's even further along there. Because they have a familiarity with this offense. There may not be a ton of starting experience, on-field experience in game situations, but there is enough to help with that Miami front seven. Everywhere else on the field, on offense, Florida has a decided advantage except tight end, where Miami's guys, Will Mallory and Brevin Jordan, have proven just a bit more. And in his 3 seasons at Arkansas, Miami's offensive coordinator, Dan Enos, his tight ends combined to average 59 catches per season. So, now part of that's playing in that run-heavy Arkansas run-type offense that Brett Bielema was bringing to the table. But that's the style I think Miami should employ here versus Florida to protect Jarren Williams. That's not to say Florida isn't going to be good there at tight end, but we have to see more from Gamble, Pitts, and Kroll. Everywhere else on offense, I like where Florida stands. With the defense, I think it's just a case of Todd Grantham and his scheme and players being too much for Jarren Williams and that young offensive line at the tackle position. Jeff Thomas is a nice wide receiver, not enough versus Henderson and Wilson in my opinion, especially given the pressure. The front seven would be living in the backfield all night long Saturday night. But all that said, I have a Gators 34-13 win over Miami. It'd be a tough, passionate, hard-fought game because of the rivalry. That is this game. Eventually, Florida's just too much, and then the second half breaks away. I do think the Gators get up early, but won't quite break away. It'll still be Miami playing from behind a bit. I don't think they break it open into the second half until Mullen gets a feel for the game, and the run game takes over and takes it right to Miami. So that's how that's what I'm looking for in this game. Some of those matchups. Yeah, Florida can get off to a faster start on offense and defense and make Miami play from behind. Florida does that. They have a pretty easy victory if they get up by a couple scores early on, I think. So here we go. All the talk's almost over. We're almost ready for kickoff. Florida, Miami, Week 0, kicking off 150 years of college football on ESPN. I think we're all ready for the game. I know I am. I know most of you out there are just tired of talking about it and ready to see some football. I'm the host of Gators Breakdown Podcast, David Waters. You can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SEC. Be sure to join me on Sunday with Will Salmon from The Athletic as we'll take a look back at Florida, Miami, and, of course, all the rest of the Gators Breakdown episodes following with Will Miles on Monday as well. And we'll hopefully be looking back at a Gators victory. And guys and girls out there, thanks for listening to this episode of Gators Breakdown.